You know, it's amazing that whenever I actually try to do anything with audio or video, it's quiet all day. No one calls, no one texts until I actually sit down to actually try to do something where I need it quiet. Now, how about that? Isn't that the way the fucking world works? I'm watching a beautiful sunset here. I'd love to tell you that I have something of value to say. I'm not sure I have anything of value to add to anybody's lives today. The isolation has really gotten to me today. And because I don't want to go on live on Facebook or anything else and be a blabbling, I can't even talk, a blabbering idiot and play woe is me for the world to see, I'm just going to sit here and let this roll, and maybe I'll come up with something that is valuable in some damn way to offer up to people. Maybe I won't. Who the hell knows? You know, one of the things that gets to me about being isolated, not having a lot of interaction with, face to face with other fellow human beings, is one of the ways I process information is I interact with others. I like to learn from others. I like to have conversations with others. And it's kind of how I process information, even if I'm not talking about a certain thing that, needs to be processed through. It's kind of processing in the back of my brain, and kind of allows that to happen in a more efficient and kind of laid back kind of way. But I can tell you, I mean, being down here, and I'm pretty damn good at flying solo. This has gotten to me some, and I have some days where it's just like I feel like I'm imprisoned in my own damn skin, and I hate it so much that it infuriates me, and I try to find positive ways to channel that energy, but some days I just can't do it, And so what winds up happening with some folks, I mean, everybody's got, their families and their children and their friends. When you realize that, and you realize that you're kind of in a space where you just need to vent, you need to get stuff out. I try to give other people that opportunity because God knows I know what it feels like, because most of the time I have to just freaking scream into the middle of the night because I'm so damn frustrated. And I don't want to lay that on other people. And sometimes, I mean, just to be able to get to where I'm trying to get to in a real conversation with some of my buddies that, I can do that with some, it's like using sticks of dynamite to blow concrete out of the way to get to what I actually want to talk about in the same way. It's like this pressure, this frustration, this agitation that it's like somebody kind of coming in and constantly throwing dirt into the well, right? Trying to stop up the well. And, of course, people don't want to be around negative. I don't want to be around negative, but I don't know what the hell people expect me to do here, because I sure as hell am not going to keep it in, because that's what makes you depressed, makes you sick. Of course, they'll tell you the opposite, and then they've made a market out of that too, because everybody stuffs their fucking feelings, right? And it makes them sick. And then they go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, I think you're depressed. Well, what's depression? It's anger turned inward. You got to get that shit out, man. They wouldn't tell you that if you got bit by a fucking snake. They'd get the poison out, right? They give you an antidote, right? Yeah, but when it comes to the frame of reference of how we deal with other people, We don't apply the same methodology. We don't apply the same thinking, right? It's because really what the system's built on, it's built on other people that are terrified of their own fucking feelings because they live in a fucking shell of fakery, and they want everybody else, right, to adhere to their false reality, right? And what they're really telling you is they're terrified of their own feelings, right? And then there's other people that have been abused, and they're terrified of other people's feelings, right? But they also have their own unresolved feelings. And so it's kind of a little bit of both there. Nevertheless, when everybody's stuffing their shit, it builds up. And that's not good. That's not good psychologically. It's not good physiologically, and it's not good spiritually. I try to spend time in prayer and meditation every day and give it to God. But he made us to be around one another. And quite frankly, I'm a type A personality that has, tempered over the years a bit. But I'm still a type A personality. And after a certain point of being isolated, I absolutely feel like a Coke bottle that somebody has shaken up and I'm about to freaking, pop. So I've tried to use that to go into, to positive things, right? But it's how our society and the systems that are over us they're manufacturing it. So then they go, oh, see, you're angry. Well, let me ask you this, let's put it in different context. If somebody tied your ass up, was plundering you, and then beating the hell out of you, and every time you protested or tried to fight back, they claimed to be the victim when they're actually victimizing you, would you keep being silent, or would you fight back harder? Because I'll tell you what, I used to try to be the, silent lamb kind of guy, just quiet, not silent to the lamb, but although I can understand why some people might become that way too. Our society is pretty good at manufacturing all kind of dysfunction. But, oftentimes the victimizers play the victim as a cover to continue victimizing others. It takes discernment to see what is what, and time sometimes, because it can be very confusing and perplexing. We live in a world of that right now. We live in a world where so many people, so many organizations, and so many nations are playing the victim while victimizing others and playing that whole game that, it can drive you near the edge of, going nuclear. So when we have to find ways to not be controlled by our emotions, but channel that energy, channel it into something, but not ignore them, right? We've got this culture that seems to think that, and this is true a lot of times in like religious settings, they'll tell you things like, vengeance is the Lord's, right? They'll tell you, they'll cherry pick certain scriptures or certain doctrines or whatever and use them. Well, anger is not a sin, all right? You may sin in your anger. There's also scripture for that. Don't sin in your anger. It doesn't say that anger is a sin. But the people that will treat it that way, and you may have a legitimate reason to be angry. There's a difference between being angry and dealing with it and stuffing it and becoming a passive-aggressive asshole or bitch. We have a whole society of those. And what you see, like, let me give you a macro level example of this. China is an example. They love to play the victim. The CCP loves to play the victim. Their entire society that they rule over, they use a victimizer, victim, fake victim mentality. Okay? No one has abused the Chinese people more than their own leadership. But they blame everybody else. They play the victim. Oh, it's colonization. I mean, look what the British did 100 years ago. Well, why don't we just go back, 60 years ago and look at what Mao did? I mean, Mao killed far more people than the British did there, or the United States. Of course, if the CCP keeps this shit up, we're probably going to, that may change, and it'll be just if it does, but only if it focuses on the CCP and not the Chinese people at large, because they're the true victims. The nations on Earth that are affected by this madness of the pandemic, they're the victims. Being plundered by the CCP, by your elites, your politicians, and corporate leaders, they're the victimizers, along with the CCP. See, that's how the whole ball game works. It's all a bunch of bullshit, right? It's all about deception, and it's about diverting you. You see, if they can keep you guys fighting one another like a bunch of dumb idiots, they can keep fighting. I mean, they can keep plundering you while you're fighting one another. That's actually a tactic in Chinese warfare, which, by the way, is one of the most widely read books in politics and in business. How about that? Meanwhile, they're all making money on you. So there's the business part, right? And you eat it up. They play you like a fiddle, like Nero's playing his fiddle, burning down Rome, and you're the ones on fire. They're cooking you up, and then they're eating your lives. And meanwhile, they've got you fighting one another and fighting anybody that tries to bring you together. Pretty clever of them, aren't they? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clever when you really think about it. They're clever. They're crafty. That is the nature of a dragon. That's what serpents are. Right? And then they like to play the false light, Oh, here, now that we've created this problem, let us step in and be the savior to you, right? Let us give you the privilege, right, to do X, Y, and Z. When before, right, it was your right, your freedom, your liberty. But they want to turn it into a privilege that they can offer or rescind at will based upon how well you bend a knee to their deceptions, right? Their cajoling, their manipulation, and their threats. So, again, think about all the anger that everybody's been sucking down while living in that kind of madness, right? Well, how did they deal with that? Well, they have to create an enemy, of course. Here, the Democrats, right, have the Republicans as enemies, and the Republicans have Democrats. The liberals have conservatives as enemies. The conservatives have liberals as enemies, right? So the socialists have capitalists as their enemies, and the capitalists have, socialists as their enemies. Of course, white folks have enemies in the black community, and the black community sees the white folks as oppressors and, destroying them as well while they're fighting amongst one another, and white folks can't agree on anything. You see how they do it? It's a divide and conquer strategy. And you guys are played like a bunch of damn meat puppets. It's true. I'm not blaming you for it. I get it. I understand. It's hard. the winds of these times are going to try to blow you to one extreme or the other. Now, it's one thing to bend with the wind. It's another thing to break and get blown away to the one side or the other. But what we have here in this country is we have a failure of people to be willing to walk in other people's shoes and look at it from their point of view, because we've gotten so extreme and so myopic, and which is what happens when you're fearful, right? And when you're angry and you're trying to control your emotions, because everything in society, you can't tell, you got to hold in your emotions. You got one side that's allowed to have emotions, regardless of how irrational they are, and the other side that's tells you that, you can't have any emotions. You've got to keep that shit in check, right? And then, of course, if you're standing in the middle and you go to the people that have, that are all about their emotions, what are they telling you? Oh, well, they're offended that you have emotions. You see how the whole game works? The further you go out from the middle to the left or right, the more absolutely, totally absurd it is, and the more insane you become. And you can't see it because it's almost a one-to-one ratio. The further you go away from the true middle, right, the more blind you get to your own vulnerabilities and your own perspectives and your own lack of logic. Now, you may be very logical on certain things, but even those people that are trying to connect with you don't fully buy into everything you agree with, right, that are trying to build bridges to you and maybe work with you on some things of mutual interest, you can't even do that. You see the paradox? Whose hands does that play into? Because it's surely not to your benefit. It's not. And you're not hurting the other side in terms of the power. You're only hurting your fellow citizens who they know you actually need, right, to come together in the middle and work with to throw off the chains of their stupidity and their domination. And then they tell you things like, well, every time if you fight back against the powers, man, they're just going to come down on you harder, And how they'll put this in religious terms is, well, we'll just got to wait till the Lord comes back, or, it's not for us to choose. We just need to take it and deal with it. All right, that's bullshit. Okay, that's not even biblically sound. Okay, that's not even rationally sound. I mean, they create a facsimile of everything on both sides and then offer it up to you because there are certain areas of your life that are lies. You know that, right? And they speak to that so that, they can feed that lie in you and keep you enslaved on that end of the spectrum or the other. That's how they control you. Those are the hooks that they use to use you like a meat puppet. Now, I don't know about you. There are a lot of things I can agree with on both sides of the aisle, but I can tell you what, it's become increasingly difficult to deal with people the farther out that they are on the polarity. I can't deal with them. And, furthermore, a lot of people have given up and given in to cynicism, and cynicism is a neurotoxin for your intellect. It poisons your intellect. It poisons your ability to work with others. And, ultimately it sets up a root of bitterness. There's a difference between somebody who appears bitter on the outside and somebody who is bitter in their heart. So, of course, everybody's got their narratives on each side, to offset that too, right? But the teeth of the Hydra are upon you, right? Well, that's those two. That jaw has two parts, right? And one's on the far left and one's on the far right. Of course, they only show you the extremes, to keep you in check when majority of people are not in those extremes. But they start pushing you to those and you start adopting that because, well, there's no one that's kind of more moderate or whatever, right? Well, that is a deception. Broad is the path to destruction. Many there are that go that way. It's mind-blowing how stupid we all are. We buy it every time. You know, that's why I say we have a facsimile of what the system's supposed to actually be. It's an inversion. You know, it's like a transparency that's been oppressed on the people. It's been put on everybody, including a lot of people that try to go into public service and do the right thing. I don't think every politician is completely corrupt by any means. I don't think all corporations and business leaders are corrupt by any means. But you have a system that has been corrupted, and that corruption, when allowed to go unabated its way, well, what it does is it corrupts everything. It basically slings mud on everything, and everybody is affected by it to one degree or another. You know, I mean, could you imagine, even 15 years ago, people, even 20 years ago, I mean, people talking and treating one another the way they treat one another now? And you wonder why your country's a mess. So what happens is in that kind of environment, everything starts to appear after a time like a conspiracy. Everybody's out to get somebody else because in many cases, people have become that way. And that has an effect on people's perceptions. And then they say, well, hell, if everybody else is that way, I might as well do it to survive, right? So they buy into the deception, and it just grows and grows and grows until you have a society where everybody can't trust one another. They think everybody is out to get them, so you got paranoia, and you've got abuse, and you got hatred. And that builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds until finally the whole thing pops. And then what do they do? Well, you think the 1% is ever going to pay the price for you? No, they're not. What's going to happen is they're going to have you pay the price for them by fighting one another. Right? It's classic Chinese warfare. It's classic warfare in general. If you could defeat your opponent by not having to fight them, by getting all your opponents to fight one another, thereby weakening themselves, not only do you have the option of playing the false sage and pretending to be the peacemaker, but in fact, you're fueling both sides to destroy one another, so then you can dominate them. And that's a proxy warfare model. Why should I fight you directly if I can get, the people that are already against you, that are also against me, to fight you? If you fight one another, why should I have to fight you? I don't have to. You'll destroy one another. There's a truth in that. Broad is the path to destruction. There's a right way and a wrong way that is applied. But after a time, when you can't get people to come together and work together on things and have logical dialogue, and the cynicism is turned into bitterness, and the bitterness is turned into hatred, and the hatred's turned into vengeance, and the vengeance is turning into violence and accusation and destruction, well, you do it to yourselves. When a society goes dark like that, it either has a civil war or it's weakened to the point where its enemies take it over, which is kind of what has happened to you guys. Now, we still have the appearance of world power. We have power, but we're being undermined from within and underneath everything. You know how your enemies work is, we've got economic problems. Well, how are we going to, how's a politician going to get your vote if you can't promise you that economics are going to get better, right? You're going to get higher wages. You're going to, get better jobs or whatever the problem is. Well, your enemies step in, right? And they offer money and they offer, tools to assure that the politician can get in power. And I know some of you are thinking, oh, well, that's exactly what Trump did. That's what all of them do. All right. If you're going to make this all about Trump, just turn it off and go your way. I don't want to deal with you. And if you're going to make it all about Obama, I don't want to deal with you. Just turn it off and go your way. There's nothing I can do with you. You're ultimately going to destroy yourselves anyway. So just get out of the way and don't even listen. But the rest of you, listen. So China, for example, gets a hold of, local leaders, business community, and they use something that is a real need as a leverage point to gain control and power. It's pretty smart. That's how geopolitics works, and it's a form of warfare. All government interactions are, to some degree, a level of warfare. And that's why those people that clamor for peace at all costs are proxies, because a false peace to appease, your own fears is not a peace at all. In fact, it ensures that you're going to have more destructive and unjust wars. But yet you've also got the other group, right? Because it's always a binary, because they want to divert you to one thing while they're doing the other. So you got people that want constant war. Of course, they don't want to win the wars. They want constant war so that they can, sacrifice your children, right? Sacrifice our brothers and sisters and friends and family members. Sacrifice the public good, our public health, and use the fear of and terror of it all, right, to control you and keep you divided amongst one another, The peace at all costs folks and the constant war folks. And really, they're just two sides of the same mouth with a forked tongue. And meanwhile, there's a lot of great people that go into the military, right? A lot of people that go into humanitarian work that hate war and stuff. They use all of it. They manipulate all of it, and then they use everybody against one another and keep the whole damn thing going. I mean, it's bad business. I mean, if things actually improved, well, you wouldn't need all the defense sector that you have to the degree you have it around the world. You wouldn't have to, have all the humanitarian organizations. I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm saying there's a correct and an incorrect context, a just and an unjust context for those things. What I'm showing you is how that's used and taken out of context and used for a lie. And they just manipulate the hell out of you. So here you are, you're actually in a real war, and we're not willing to fight it because everybody doesn't want to go to war. Everybody's tired of war because, a lot of people made a lot of money keeping the other wars going and not actually doing anything to win them. And there were a lot of decisions that were made trying to do the right thing, right? But they didn't know how to get out of it because they wanted to appease the people around the world that were already using the same weaponized narratives. It's the same thing people do, right? So we've been victimized as a nation. We've also played the victimizer, right? But the other nations have done the same things to us. It's real easy, back in the 80s for, European socialists and hyper liberals to be like, we want the Yankees to go home and take your nukes. Well, we could have. And, they could have learned to live underneath Stalin's system if the Soviet Union took them over. We had to pay for that. We had to pay the price for that. Okay, now they get that because we may not be around and they might have to fight a third war on that continent, and we won't be able to do it because we're weak internally, we're divided, we're worn out, we're sick, and we're economically, beaten to the ground. And that won't change until we can actually come together in the middle and solve some issues. But meanwhile, your enemies are using all of those pain points to keep you down, keep you divided, manipulate you with information, because here's how they do it, right? When you're getting stuff online, okay, it may appear, sometimes it may be CNN, it may be Fox News, it may be some other source, you don't know. Because the way that when you have compromised systems, there are algorithms that actually can change something as simple as a tense in a document and skew the whole thing, and it becomes weaponized to manipulate you. Then you've got people that just are assuming things, that are deceived to one degree or another, to one side of the spectrum or another, that, believe their assumptions. And of course, everybody's got their own level of confirmation bias, and that fuels one another against one another, and it fuels the self-justification mechanisms that everybody's using within themselves to continue self-justifying and fighting everybody else, which limits your ability to actually see them in any kind of real terms, right? Making them more and more and more your enemy, and then more and more looking at you the same way. That's how division occurs. And you're all being led to your destruction as that occurs. Sucks, doesn't it? I see it all the time. Whenever there's a reason why I spend so very little time on Facebook until recently with the crisis. Because people hide behind their technology, their insecurities, their fears. Of course, it's more fake than the fakery that, when you didn't have technology. People always had insecurities and fears. They always wanted to be liked or seem clever or whatever the hell their thing was. Everybody wanted everybody to know their marriages were perfect, their children were perfect, they had the perfect marriages, the perfect homes, the perfect vacations, the perfect everything. And then, of course, everybody else that didn't, that were kind of honest about it, felt like shit because, well, they're not perfect. Well, no one's perfect. Everybody's got problems. Just because somebody has more stuff or less stuff, or the appearances of a better life, or even if they do have a better life, that's not a reflection of you. You shouldn't feel bad about that. You should be glad if they're having a good, things are going good for them, But of course, it attacks, especially when you add more layers like technology in front of it. You can't even see the individual. You can't even interact with that individual other than through your own confirmation bias. That's what it creates, a prison of that with digital technology, and it rewires you. And so everybody becomes locked off into weaponized demography, and everything is just tailored to you. The algorithms are tailored to feed more of your own self to yourself. Your own demographic boxes get smaller and smaller and smaller because the algorithms are learning that, and they're just feeding you more of the same. Whether you're on any kind of media, digitally, or on, social networks or what have you. And everybody spends all this inordinate amount of time on it, but do they ever sit down and have a real conversation about stuff? You have the best conversations in person and verbally. And you can do that with video to some degree. But there's nothing like sitting down and having a heart-to-heart with somebody in person. And now they've taken that away from everybody with this mess. It's crazy, isn't it? So now no one knows what the hell's going on. Everybody's perplexed and confused and frustrated. And, look, I deal in information every day. That's what I do. I research. I come up with solutions. I come up with ways to help people, to expose stuff, to study how our enemies do things, how it affects us, how we can push back on it, how we can understand it, But it affects me too, especially being in isolation, and not being around people. Now, don't get me wrong. I've got a nice prison here, right? 200 acres in rural America down here in Georgia. It's a beautiful sunset. I've watched. The stars are coming out. It's wonderful. But I'm not a hermit, okay? I'm not a monk. I love interacting with people. But you see, what happens, the longer you're isolated, the harder it is to get past the programming that occurs when you're isolated and you don't have interactions with people. And then it becomes socially awkward, right? Because everybody's walking on eggshells around everybody else and no one's willing to give anybody grace about it. So we just become further isolated. And that's the other side of how they try to get you to walk into a fake life. That's a domination system. So you put on you get up, you put on your whitewash for the day, right? You put on your clay mask for the day. Whatever they expect, right? Because you got to get the paycheck, You don't want to piss off the Joneses next door because, they may not look at your, after your house when you're, on vacation or whatever it is. We become shallow-fied. We become focused on the symptoms, on the appearances, and life is drained of any depth, any authenticity, and everybody knows it. And it affects everybody, right? And so that just builds up more stress and more frustration. Of course, that comes out sideways with those that we love the most. Even though we hate it that it does, but it seems like the only same place we can do it, because the moment we let our hair down, we try to vent out or try to, just try to get real, right? It all comes flooding out like bubbling venom, or like a volcano blowing its top, or a tidal wave, or whatever metaphor you want to assign to it. Then we feel like shit, right? So we beat ourselves up. And if the other person's dealing with the same thing and can't be forgiving, and doesn't understand it, or you guys don't have an open conversation, particularly in marriages or friendships or business relationships, you wind up hating one another. So now you're divided and you're further isolated. See how the whole game is played? Divide and conquer. Just keep dividing, right? You're getting cut up all the way down to the atoms. And meanwhile, they're making money on you the whole damn way. And what it really boils down to is you're dealing with a spiritual reality that is a sick reality, that's a domination system that's inherently darkness. Some people call it the zeitgeist. Some people call it the world domination system. Some people call it Satan, or evil, or the presence of evil, the spirit of the age, or whatever thing you want to assign to it. But that's what it does, right? So you get sick, you get frustrated, you have to do this stuff. Everybody hates it, right? Everybody knows it's fake, but everybody keeps doing it, right? And people keep making up rules to keep, putting on you. Become Sisyphean, you got to roll the rock up that day. Then you get back home, the rock comes back down. You got to get up the next day and do it. Up and down, up and down, up and down, never changes, right? Meanwhile, you're being programmed. Nothing's going to ever change. Nothing's ever going to change. By the way, here's some more rules you have to follow. Here's some more rules you have to follow. More rules, more rules. No one knows where the rules came from. No one can even tell you where the rules came from. In fact, they're not sure, but they just know their rules, and you've got to follow those rules because, God damn it, they're following the rules. And if they're going to follow the rules, they're going to make your ass follow the rules too. Even though the rules have nothing to do with anything that edifies, builds up, protects, or does anything of value within the society. That's called tyranny. And it further degrades you. That stress causes your adrenals to blow, and your adrenals cause cortisol to build up in your system. The cortisol, affects your brain, destroys your cardio systems. It's slow murder. It's like a python, sucking the life out of you, just squeezing it out of you, one day at a time. Meanwhile, everybody's playing along, right? Because somebody came in the middle of the night, metaphorically speaking, and rewrote the social contract with everybody. Or you can't say these things. You can't do these things. And they've got an entire legal argument built up and an entire system that they've co-opted yours to build, right? because they can't build it on their own. They have to steal something else. They have to steal something that's already in place because they're not competent enough to build something from the ground up, which is what tyranny always does. It takes something that is and takes it out of context and makes it something worse than it was before. Kind of like what a lie does to truth. It tries to, it's not the lack of truth, it's the misuse of truth. It's using truth out of context for the wrong intent. But that's what you live in every day. That's what your neighbors live in. Right? But you play along. Because if you don't play along, you're not going to get a paycheck. And, you got to take care of the missus, and you got to take care of the kids' college. And, you've got that boat you're paying off, and that house that you've got a mortgage on, maybe a second mortgage or a third mortgage on, And all the stuff that you have, it's got a greater price tag to it than even the interest rate on the loans you got to get it. Because you live in a debt-based system. And it's designed to always keep you in debt. Not just financially, but spiritually and otherwise, but it's all an illusion. It's a domination system. It's an enslavement system. So then we're told this is the best thing in the world. This is the most amazing place on earth. Well, it is and it isn't. The idea is amazing for sure. But the reality of it isn't quite living up to the ideal. And people could say, well, you never live up to the ideal. Well, that's particularly true if you're being lied to and the whole thing's being compromised. Because what happens is you move further and further away from the ideal until it becomes plainly obvious that you're so far off track that the ideal now has been lost. And now it's just a domination system. It's in full entropy. It's rotting, and everybody's losing their minds. They're sick. They're, enslaved. They hate one another. Their marriages are collapsing. Their businesses are collapsing. And cynicism and bitterness builds up even more and more. Well, there's a point at which you run out of loved ones that, you can vent to and they can vent to. And, what winds up happening is the whole thing blows up. It's either that or you get sick and it kills you. Or you get on your knees and you say, I can't take this crap anymore. God, you got to help me. I need the grace to get up every day and see things as you see it and make a difference. And ask him to help you change your life. Of course, now you're in a system that says that that's a lie, right? You see how it works? So now you've got a medical system that's polluted. So now you're getting sick and you don't even have control of the very things that you have to get for medicine. Your academic system's polluted. Your enemies are in that. You see how death shows up? Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And he always does it with a domination system. He always does it with false promises. He always does it with the temptation that you're missing out on something while he's actually conning you out of everything that you have. That's what you live in. That's not the America I want to live in. And it's true that nothing here is forever. But the enemy will use that against you too. So that you just give up. Because if you're not willing to fight, well, that means you're already a slave. And what do slaves become? Well, prisoners become casualties. And the whole system's designed to do that. And when the end of this crisis finally ends and you find out just how much you've been bamboozled, it's not that there hasn't been a virus. There has been. And there have been people that got sick very sick, and there have been a lot of people to die. But when you find out how long it's gone on and how your enemies lied to you and how people within our own system lied to our officials and used it for political means and financial means and you name it, all kinds of means. And when you find out what's happened in some of the hospitals in New York City and how decisions were made not based on medical research or science or even just sound medical practice, it was based upon monetary factors. I hope you remember that I told you this. Because this, right, is the trajectory for the whole country if we do not come together and work on stuff together and stop being a bunch of pawns to the polarity at the far left and the far right and, those that are enemies inside and out. That means we all have to deal with ourselves. The question is, do you have the guts to do that? Is your survivability stronger that you're willing to see the truth about things, that you can actually be under the protection of God's grace and let the truth guide you in love and be an agent of justice and mercy by allowing your pride to be exposed and removed? It's already exposed. It's just you're the one that needs to see it. You can say, well, that's pretty arrogant of you to say. Yeah, well, that's a great projection. People have been doing it to me my whole life, but I have been looking at my life, my whole life. I don't deny that I have to deal with my own pride, and I do. But because I say something that seems confident and cogent, that maybe strikes home, does not mean I'm arrogant. It means that it hit you where it hurts. And maybe that's where you need to start with things. So you need to look there. Because projecting it on me or somebody else isn't going to work. That just makes you part of the problem. Your own problem and everybody else's. And it just continues the domination system that's destroying you and destroying our country. So how does it feel to get a taste of what I've had to live in for a long time? Sucks. I never wished it. And I never wanted it to be anybody else to have to experience it. But now you know. Now you know what I fight. And if you don't come to a place where you understand you're in a war and understand what it is you're actually up against, well, you remain a prisoner and ultimately a casualty. And prisoners are often used as proxies, human shields for those that are not only destroying them, but want to use you as a proxy to destroy others. That's how this system globally works. That's a domination system. That's meta war. Some other people would call it a spiritual war. All wars that you see kinetically, kinetic means physical, when you start seeing bombs drop, missiles fired, all that, that's just the obvious outworking of what's been going on behind the scenes a long time. If you ever want that kind of stuff to stop, particularly in your own lives and smaller scale wars that you fight with your friends and family and coworkers and people that you know, then you're going to have to see how it works. That means you're going to have to take a long look at yourself and ask God to remove the things in you that prevent you from seeing things as they are. And the lie will tell you the entire time, you're a piece of shit. It's going to do everything it can to keep you from going there. It's going to tell you all kinds of things about what I'm telling you here. Oh, that's a lie. He's full of shit. He's conning you, whatever it is. Just know I'm telling you before it happens. I'm warning you. However, the lie is not as strong as the lie makes you think it is. But it's going to be a battle. So what do you really value? Because you're in the war regardless of whether you want to be or not. Okay? And if you want to avoid bombs and missiles and bullets and all that crap happening here, and around the world, you got to start dealing with the war for yourself. You got to see the war that's being fought over you and for you. Because God loves you. I love you. I don't like you sometimes, some of you, and you don't like me most of the time, probably either. That's okay. You know, that's not my flesh. My heart is always the same towards you. I love you and I care about you regardless. God's a lot better at it than me. I'm terrible at it. There's a latency sometimes in how I deal with stuff. It takes me a while to get there sometimes. And I get clouded. I'm constantly having to dig out the shit that gets thrown into the well of my life so the water can flow. Just happens to be tonight, the water's flowing a little bit. And I'm bored as hell. I'm lonely down here. It sucks. You know, I'm not real good at just turning on a mic and talking to, you know, an imaginary person. I like to talk to people. This is, you know, weird to me. But I spend a lot of time working on things, and, you know, there are a lot of things I can offer up to you to help you understand what's going on in the world around you and in your own life. And, you know, and you have things that I can learn from that I would love to learn from. I don't by all means know all things. You know, we all need one another. Maybe this is a little easier to digest than the last two things I put up. I hope it is. You know, I'm going to do some more tonight. But right now, you know, this segment, I'm going to leave you with this. And, you know, hopefully, I've said something that resonates with some of you, and maybe put some light on some things, and we can develop it more later. If you have any questions, you can ask me, and I'll sit here on the mic and answer them and put it up for everybody to see, you know. Or you can get a hold of me directly. We can talk by phone. God knows I'd love to talk to another human being. Only ones I see are the ones that are driving by, you know. And I'm like a stationary object here, so they don't even see me. Or they pretend not to. It's easier that way, you know. All right, y'all. God bless you. And I'll talk to you in a little bit. Bye-bye.